So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Tyler mentioned I teach at UBC-O. The Faculty of Management has an ethics course, so and we're not under the illusion that you can just kind of make people ethical by having them, for 36 credit hours or whatever it is. But it's a sign of a recognition that ethics needs to be given more attention in our business life. I did my MBA in the mid-'80s. Never looked at ethics at all. I mean, it just was not on the agenda. But it's one of the things we have Enron to thank for. And Enron's sort of the poster child, but there were several big corporate scandals in the early part of this millennium, and business schools started doing a little bit of self-reflection about what is our responsibility for this, and having a theological education, this reflection stuff is good, and I'm used to it, but a lot of my colleagues are not. So we're still struggling with how this happens. But my students are not struggling nearly as much as we, the faculty, are, because students are, I won't say they're all reflective, but students are thinking about their place in the world, what they want out of life. I get very few business students who want to go and make $1 billion on Bay Street. I get more business students who want to save the world. And the biggest concern that they have is sustainability. So for a couple of years, I taught sustainability as well as ethics. They're not completely distinct by any means, but that gives me a little bit of credibility in saying I know something about each of them. But what I thought I'd do in this conversation is, well, give you a little bit of a sense of what I think ethics is and how it's connected to this modern, and by sustainability, I think the more descriptive term might be eco-sustainability. So, because I had a guest lecturer once in my sustainability class, and he came in and talked about how to make sure your company is always making money. That was sustainability for him.
Right.
So eco-sustainability, of course, is how we can all keep breathing, which is a different issue. So, ethics, there's some folks teach business who say that you can separate out ethics from business, or ethics from some parts of business, where they talk about professional ethics, or there's a different kind of ethics that are part of business life that are different from everyday life. For me, and that's all nonsense, and that's because I think, and the church probably has a lot to do with this. I think a lot of people have moved towards a sense that ethics is somebody telling me what to do. It's somebody telling me what's right and what's wrong. And if it's not somebody telling me what's right and what's wrong, it's me telling you what's right and what's wrong. So we have a sense of ethics as rules, and we don't ask, why do we have these rules? What underlies these rules? And it's one of the best statements of what ethics is was actually said about law. And I've just adapted it for ethics by changing the word law to ethics. But one of the scholars that most influenced me was a gentleman. He died a year or two ago in New York, named Harold Burman, who he studied religion and law, the interaction of law and religion. And just before I give you his definition of law, the way that he came to study that is interesting, I think. He was an expert in Soviet law. This goes back a little ways, right? Folks remember the Soviet Union? So, and the question that he had was, why is there disobedience in an absolute police state? And his conclusion was that unless you have a religious or a quasi-religious, I mean, he didn't mean Christianity or Islam, but unless you had some commitment to the social structure, to having the society function together, you could never have laws that were, you could never have a police state that was effective enough to make sure that people did what you want. And so that's where he started to see there's a connection between religion, which is about what we hold is ultimate, in my understanding. Religion is about what we hold as being of ultimate importance, of ultimate purpose. And it's also, I think religion helps us deal with mystery, with the limits to what we can know. I don't think religion does much more than that, but those are very important things. Law, according to Berman, is the way in which we structure our lives together so that we move towards achieving those ultimate purposes. And so law, and I would say ethics is exactly the same here, is not just rules, although it includes rules, but it's behaviors, it's understanding, it's channels of communications, it's actions, it's activities, it's all the things that we do together in a way that is structured in order to move our society towards that ultimate goal. And Aristotle used the word thriving or flourishing to describe that state. And I kind of like that. You know, we want things to be healthy and flourishing and interacting well. So Berman ended up saying that law is what creates the conditions where love can live. And I say that of ethics too. It's those things that we do as people together to create the conditions where love can live. And so everything that we do is contributing to making the world a more loving or a less loving place. And therefore, I don't think anything is without ethics. But that doesn't mean that there's rules that you have to follow or else the world's going to be less loving, you know, and I don't know what they are if they did exist. But it's something that's evolving and growing and always under discussion, always under negotiation. So if that's what ethics is, what does that have to do with sustainability? Well, I'll just make one point and then throw it open for discussion. To me, the primary the primary mental construct that we have in Western society that contributes to our devastating treatment of the natural world is our concept of property. And just to put it in a bit of a nutshell, until Western culture, until the 1500s, say, basically had the idea that God owns everything. The king is God's appointed steward of everything, and then the lords and nobles are the king's stewards, and the peasants. Actually, peasants were property themselves; they couldn't own anything. But I'm not saying that's a great system, but at least it recognized that human beings were not the ultimate owners of anything. Indigenous people around the world, and I hope that Western people once thought this, but it's way far back. But indigenous people around the world, in this continent, and I know through work with a scholar in New Zealand, it's very similar there. Indigenous people have a sense that people are part of the natural world. And I think ownership is not really a concept that Indigenous people get. I mean, they can pick up on what Western people mean by it, but in their own cultural understanding, they don't get it because it implies a separation of persons from the landscape and from what is owned. What happened in the West was, at the time of the Reformation, the part of what the Reformation was about was freeing people from the shackles of the Catholic Church, and that led to freeing people from the shackles of the monarchy. And so part of that was, and this came in the 18th century with John Locke, part of that was development of a new sense of what property is. So instead of property being something that we hold on, it's something that is God's, and we hold it with an obligation to care for it and give it back to God, property became something that human beings own themselves. Locke's theory, John Locke is the, although he's 300 years dead, is still kind of the starting point for Western thinking about property in the modern sense. And his position was that the world is inert, that there's just kind of dead matter out there until a human being mixes their labor with it. And then that human being owns it. So, you know, if there's a field that's been feeding buffalo for 1,000 years, it's just inert until I come along, stick my plow in, and start growing corn or whatever. So that kind of thinking, what it did was, it kicked God out of the equation for Westerners. God, or the divine, or the mysterious splendor of Mother Nature basically was tossed out, and the world became something that people could own. And I wish I'd memorized this, but there's a wonderful quotation from the judge, a guy named William Blackstone, who sort of wrote the book. He literally wrote the book of English common law in the 17th century, right at the time of the Reformation, right? And he defined property as that sole and despotic possession of the goods of the earth over against the claims of any other being in the universe.
It's pretty broad.
That's pretty broad, and that being in the universe, that's God. I mean, he's saying that human beings own things to fini. And so if you own something with that sort of absolutism, you can do whatever you want with it. And then it's another spin of the conversation, but the sort of libertarian understanding of economic activity that has become predominant now is that everything can be reduced to money, and it's best if it's reduced to money. So that means I've got the most choice in the world. So in other words, acres and acres of untouched boreal forest in northern Alberta, they're worth nothing. You know, it's useless. It's inert. You turn it into cash, and I can buy, iPods or BMWs or vacations in Biarritz or whatever. We've got to turn things into money to have value. So things that aren't owned, aren't taken possession of and turned into money, are useless. So that's how we've come to view the world, in my view, that it's something we own, we can do whatever the hell we want with it, and it has no value in itself. And so why should we worry about sustaining something that has no value? No, sustaining my income, sustaining my bank account, that's important. Sustaining my capacity to put gas in my car, that's important. But, the natural world, what good is that? So, and that has to do, though, and I'll just close up with this, that has to do with our understanding of ownership. And what we've lost in that, I'm not saying that we should go back to, you know, kings being God's stewards and God owns everything and that way of structuring things. I do think that we don't own everything. We need to get that clear. But what we need to do is understand that to own something, do you know the origin of the word own? It's the same as the word owe. Interesting, eh? Because owning something means you owe an obligation to someone to care for that. Ownership and stewardship once were the same concept. You have something to care for it, to be able to give it back to God. And I think we've moved to the point where it's people can hear it more readily if we say to hand it on to the next 7 generations. You know, that works for me. But we, our Western economic system does not think of property in that way. And that's why we can chew it up and spit it out and think we're okay. So to me, it's a profoundly ethical issue, and I'll just refer you back to my definition of ethics is creating the conditions where love can live. And if we're not able to live sustainably, we're certainly not creating those conditions. So it's an ethical issue that we need to look at. But I mean, my orientation towards the world is to look at those kind of deep structural understandings and say, I mean, those are very hard to talk. You know, I'd never, you know, in a debate with Stephen Harper, you know, he'd blow me away because you can't talk about those sorts of deeper structural understandings. But I think unless we touch those in people, we're not going to make much progress, because arguing about the facts and the figures and that is like trying to steer an iceberg by just poking at the top of it. You gotta get down low.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my little heartfelt rant about ethics and sustainability.